Willkommen zurück beim Minsk Forum.
Welcome back to the Minsk Forum. A country is not living on its own. That's how a saying runs, and this is what we want to do today. Cornelius Ochmann wants to walk through that with his panelists, Belarus and its neighbors. That is our topic now in this panel.
Good afternoon to all participants and people from all the world who are interested in development in the region. Welcome to all of you, especially to the speakers and participants in the panel Belarus and its neighbors' prospects for cooperation. I hope you have had the chance to join the opening session, the speeches of the ministers of Germany and Poland, as well Mrs. Tichanowskaja and Professor Snyder. I am really happy we could invite an interesting group of experts from neighboring countries of Belarus. And for the opening, I will give the word to Mr. Przydacz, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. Mrs. Przydacz, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a great privilege, but even greater the responsibility to speak to all of you at such an important moment. I'm saying that it's an important moment because I do believe that it is the moment in history which we will all remember. Therefore, it's really good to be back in Minsk, at least in this formula, or at least in the Minsk forum online at such an important moment. And thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for this opportunity. In this part of Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe, we do understand the importance and value of good neighborly relations. All countries in the region, Poland, Belarus, Germany, Lithuania, Russia, we do share common but sometimes quite complex history. Throughout these years, Poland and Belarus rarely were among the winners. And this is exactly why, ever since Poland regained full sovereignty in 1989, the establishment of good, constructive relations with all our neighbors has been among the most important priorities of our foreign policy. This is the principle which guided us throughout the last 30 years. Also in relations with our eastern partners, with Belarus. It wasn't easy, since Poland and Belarus faced two very different development dynamics. Poland went through intensive transformation, which was guided by our strategic choice and speeded up by the accession to the EU. At the same time, Belarusians decided to go their own way, and they freely taken I would say, the eastern vector of policy and kind of different strategic alliances. And this cooperation was never easy. Let's face the truth, and actually quite vulnerable. In 2010. It was actually frozen due to the serious abuses of human rights in Belarus. But there has been one element that has never changed. If you look at the Polish statements and our practical actions, it has been our undoubted and unambiguous support for the independence and sovereignty of Belarus. I tend to believe that this is one of the main reasons why our relations became more constructive in the years prior to the August elections. It became clear to our partners over the Bug River that we want to have a strong and not a weak neighbor. Thanks to this approach, step by step, we were able to develop treaty-based bilateral relations also with our partner country, Belarus. We managed to make contacts between ministries and central institutions to protect and implement mutual interests, and the most of all, to develop a broad network of close ties among our societies. Thanks to our engagement, but also other EU states, including Germany, the host country of this event. Also, the EU decided to give these relations yet another try in 2016. Since that time, we had invested, I would say, a lot in relations with Belarus. We had all devoted kind of political capital in those relations. We try to build bridges between societies, economies, and decision makers. We had done it because we truly believed that that was the best way for the country and for the society towards sustainable modernization, economic development, and finally towards a democracy. And this is the phenomenon that drives relations among the democratic European states. I mean, everybody wants to have a political stable and economically strong neighbor because of one reason, because it makes our own country safer and our own society wealthier. And this is what you have your neighbors for in Europe. And let me emphasize quite strongly, we still believe that for the sake of a common and stable future, we will be able to rebuild our relations and to protect positive achievements in our relations with Belarus. But this clearly needs an effort. And thanks to the composition of this panel, you will probably hear many suggestions and concepts of what can or should be done. To us, down here in Warsaw, there is one element of this effort which seems necessary to move on, and it is the internal Belarusian dialogue. It is not a prerequisite or a precondition to anything. It is just an inevitable, integral element of any possible solution. Whatever the future of Belarus is, from now, it should be co-shaped by all Belarusians, including people in the streets, citizens in exile, and those who still want to preserve Belarus as it is. There is no need to engage external powers into the internal dialogue as such. We don't think that Belarusians need any big neighbor to tell them what to do, especially under military or financial pressure. It is good to remember that there are some organizations, for example, OECE, which can facilitate the process impartially. If and when Minsk is up to this, the table is ready, and I'm saying it also as a representative of the country which will be in the troika of OECE in January. So the best form to ensure broad civil participation, of course, it would be the free and fair elections. The faster Belarusian authorities end up repressions, the sooner they release political prisoners, the simpler the process will be, and the quicker we will all get back to the prosperity-oriented cooperation. We don't pose any conditions on who should win the election. It's up to the Belarusians. We don't suggest giving up your sovereignty. We just encourage to take into account the voice of the people. That's my message to the Belarusian current authorities in Minsk. Because the stability and prosperity for Belarus remain the goal for its neighbors, from the EU. Recent history of Europe and our own experience have determined our approach. We could not stay indifferent to injustice, violence, and harm to people. This is why we have all immediately released support to Belarusian people, civil society, NGOs, private companies in this difficult crisis time. This is also why the EU decided to impose sanctions on those responsible for human rights violation. What is hardly noticed in public yet is the fact that that upon Polish initiative with the great support from V4 countries and other Central European countries, the EU agreed to prepare the economic plan for democratic Belarus. It is yet again a very strong signal that Europe is directly interested in helping Belarus to again raise its head up. And that Europe wants to be constructive and forward-looking. This plan, when fully developed, will give the EU a set of measures and necessary funds to help the democratic Belarus to go through necessary transition. The EU is also ready to continue cooperation with Belarus within the Eastern Partnership Program. We are all aware of that fact that this program is very much important. Although reducing cooperation and focusing on civil society and initiatives addressed directly to the citizens. Even in this difficult time, we believe in the importance of multilateral cooperation on the working level, which allows for better understanding of each other's culture of work. Last but not least, I'd like to mention one of the big successes of our cooperation in recent years, namely mobility of the people. And I'm not talking only about the visa facilitation agreement, but I'm talking about real people crossing the border both ways. Belarusians have been among the most mobile citizens of Europe, but Belarus has also done a lot to become open to other nations, continuously broadening the territory of the visa-free touristic movement. Warsaw is ready to continue with this good neighborly habit, and we regret, unfortunately, that recently Minsk decided to drastically limit such options by forcing us to lower our personnel by 70% on the territory of Belarus. Providing our citizens to freely visit our countries seemed to be the best and cheapest practical way to build common understanding and trust. We hope that by the time the COVID pandemic will have been defeated, our embassy and consulate in Belarus will be working already in full capacity again. That would be quite positive signal from Minsk. Just okay. So to sum up, I know I'm taking too much of your time. As we speak today, it is quite clear that Belarus will never ever be the same. The faith with democratic change has been already rooted in the Belarusian soil by this incredible race of the nation. Sooner or later, it will bear fruit. I'm pretty sure. The current environment is not the most conducive one for cooperation with the Belarusian authorities, but we won't give up. We'll try to find all possible ways to maintain a good cooperation with Belarus, waiting for better times and crossing fingers for Belarusian citizens in the struggle for a better future. So we hope that all neighbors of Belarus would be positive and constructive. And I'm saying not only about EU member states, they are obviously positive and constructive, but also the other neighbor. I would be very interested to hear the views from all around Belarus. Therefore, I will not take any more of your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Przydacz, for this introduction. And we have 5 people in our panel. We will start with Mrs. Šešelgytė from Vilnius and follow with a view from Minsk, from Mr. Szadurski. Mr. Siebert from Berlin will be the next. And last but not least, at the end, Nadia Arbatova from Moscow and Anna Dinner from Warsaw. Mrs. Šešelgytė, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, organizers, for giving me this opportunity to speak on such an interesting topic and pressing topic. And what I was thinking, what would be my intake from Vilnius to this particular panel is in what kind of way I would see the future relations between the Lithuania and Belarus. And I would say that, in my mind, I have 2 scenarios. One scenario is not so optimistic, but it's related to what I'm seeing now. And I'm seeing a sort of a fatigue, and I'm seeing a lot of Russia in Belarus, and I'm seeing this constitutional amendment in the future, and potentially these amendments will bring new people into power, but I'm not sure if these new people would be a real change for Belarus, or that's going to be people whom Russia would consider being more comfortable than Lukashenko is. The other scenario is much more brighter, and in this scenario, I see a true democratization, at least 2 first steps of the democratization in Belarus. And as with the first scenario, I don't see a lot of potential for cooperation, and probably our cooperation between Lithuania and Belarus would continue along the same line. Lithuania will continue to support the opposition. Lithuania will continue to support this civic society with various projects, like inviting students to come over to Lithuania, inviting businessmen, inviting IT people to come to Lithuania, also raising the awareness about what's happening in Belarus on the European Union level. With the second, more optimistic scenario, I see many potential paths of cooperation, including the and enhancing economic relations, and IT sector is one of the very important sectors. Plus, Lithuania having itself a big experience in transformation reforms could be a good advisor and contributor, helping Belarusian society to go from the state-controlled economy to the market economy, helping to build the institutions. Plus, Lithuania could be a very good advocate of Belarus on the European level. And we have this very good experience of using this example and combining it with the soft power that we have already in the countries of the post-Soviet world, like similarly to Ukraine or Georgia. We can do this also in Belarus, because I think that, over the past months, there is this understanding in Belarus that Lithuanian society is standing behind them. And our Baltic Freedom Way, which was organized on 23rd of August in Lithuania, where 50,000 people joined together in standing hand in hand to support the democratization, the freedom of Belarus, was receiving a very good, was very well received in Belarus. So I think that this potential also is could be contributed by a common history and very close neighborhood. Because, well, if you think about, how close we are, Belarusian border is only 50 kilometers from Vilnius, and Belarusians travel to Vilnius very often. I think that third of Belarusians have been to Lithuania, have been to Vilnius. So this is a very good ground and very good potential for the future relationship. But even in this optimistic scenario, there will be two topics that will have to be dealt. First of all, Russia, because I think that what we are seeing now in Belarus is about the democratization, wish for democratization, but not for the shift, geopolitical shift. So Russia will be there in one way or another, and that is not entirely compatible with our Lithuanian attitude vis-a-vis Russia. And another big issue is going to be the Ostrovets nuclear power plant, which is now putting a big shadow on interstate relations, but also will be the question for the new government if the democratic government comes into power in Belarus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Šešelgytė. I hope Nadia Arbatova will explain the role of Russia. But before we came to Moscow, please, Mr. Szadursky, if you could explain us how in Minsk is the neighborhood discussing between the experts. Mr. Szadursky, over to you.
Спасибо, уважаемые коллеги, за приглашение, за возможность.
Thank you, dear colleagues, for inviting me here and for giving me the opportunity to voice my ideas. Of course, the expert community is multifaceted, and it has a lot of people. I can only speak to myself, for myself, I mean. I can not even speak for my faculty because we have thousands of students, the future of our country, people who know the world and want to be part of the world. Anyway, dear colleagues, just a couple of very general remarks, because all of us are analyzing the situation, but I have to live in this situation, and there is a difference between these two. So, of course, if we talk about building the constructive neighborhood relations, this is the top priority, top national priority of Belarus. Belarus is not unique in this respect. This is characteristic of many countries, most of the smaller and the middle-sized states. That is why we have a multi-vector foreign policy in Belarus, which was, of course, formulated and suggested by the authorities, but also supported by the society. And a rather significant part of expert community members. And so this is this was symbolized by the expression that Belarus needs two wings to fly. Of course, the crisis has reached its peak in the second half of this year, and there is the conflict between the state system and the rapidly developing civil society. The relations were exacerbated not only inside the country, but outside the country as well. The foreign relations also changed. So Minsk used a very well-known technique in politics. So they blamed the internal problems and the exacerbation of protests on the external forces. First, they said that the Eastern partner was responsible for that. So, yes, and we were with interest following this situation. But after some time, the vector of criticism was moved in a different direction, and now the main the people, the countries that everything is attributed to are now Poland and Lithuania. So some of the activists, some of the actors have already said that multi-vector policy for Belarus is a mistake. However, many of the civil society representatives are trying to get across to Belarusians and the international community the idea that there is the question of geopolitical choice is not too acute. Of course, we are rather unique because our case is not much like the case of Kyrgyzstan or Ukraine. We don't have to make the geopolitical choice, in terms of resolving our internal contradictions. But the expert community mostly comes to the conclusion that the crisis is based on internal reasons. Of course, there are some external factors, but everything comes down to the internal factors. The civil society representatives, including members of opposition structures, opposition bodies, we need to distinguish those two things. They called the other countries on stopping violence and helping the society. Well, up until now, the huge part of Belarusian society, including the active society, has been hoping that the best moderator would be Russia, the ally and the main political and economic partner of Belarus. So Belarusian politicians and experts, and here I'm just communicating my observations, they listen to virtually every word coming from the Kremlin, and of course, the negotiations between Russia and Belarus is very closely monitored. Now, of course, we shouldn't argue that the national interests of sovereign Belarus are not the same to the sovereign interests of other states surround us. We're different. And there are some of the differences and discrepancies between us and the neighboring countries. But in my opinion, they are not and they must not be a ground for serious conflicts. All the controversies can be eliminated by constructive dialogue. And such constructive dialogues, Belarus has been carried out up until recently very successfully with Poland and with Germany, and Mr. Zibert is one of the active participants of one of such dialogues. So, of course, without constructive pragmatic relations with our neighbors, the sovereignty of our country can be threatened. However, objectively speaking, many countries are interested in stable and sovereign Belarus. At the previous Minsk Forum I participated in, actually I participated in almost all of them, with a little exception, so this topic was broadly discussed. The region is very much interested in the stable and sovereign country of Belarus, and that is why they chose Minsk as a platform for negotiation on the issues of the Southeast. So, taking the attempts to take the Belarusian state under control, this is something that should be left in the past. In the 21st century, this shouldn't be the case. I think in the present climate, the neighboring countries must help Belarus to get out of the crisis and help it get prepared for the negotiations as soon as possible. The Belarusian nation, I want to underline it, is still the one running the country and the, let us say, true owner of the country. So thank you very much. And I hope that next time our forum will be happening in a different situation and all the formats that we have started so successfully will go on. There is just no other way for that.
For your point of view, and I will give over to Berlin to Mr. Siebert. Mr. Siebert,
guten Tag aus Berlin.
Yes, hello from Berlin. Thank you very much, first of all, to the German-Belarusian society that I can again take part in this very special Minsk forum of this year. And I'm very happy to see our Polish friends, that they are strong partners in this forum. This is a very good sign. I would like to briefly look backwards. Mr. Szadurski, I'm happy to see you again, albeit in a virtual form. You just mentioned that we were in a consulting group for strategic problems up until the summer. This time we have nearly forgotten about it. Was the time before the presidential elections. And we tried to have a rapprochement between Germany and Belarus, but also the European Union and Belarus. And we also initialed a commission of scientists of history. So we wanted to have more active participation from Belarus, and we looked at history and we had the historical visit of the federal president from Germany in Belarus. So what has come of this? Substantially speaking, we don't have a lot of outcome. I'm sorry, what we had hoped for has not happened, which was that we would see more freedoms, freedom of meeting and freedoms of expressing one's opinion, and also that maybe death penalty would be abolished. But I think from today's perspective, we still can say that we laid down the foundations under a cooperation, even under these very special circumstances. Because, for instance, since 2014, we've had more than 300 projects within the framework of our special project of cooperation within civil society with Belarus. Thereby, we helped along the training of journalists and inclusion and so on. And we also laid down lots of personal foundations for better context. Then, of course, we had August 9 and the presidential elections and a big change. And I believe that, at least for me, it was astonishing. It was quite a surprise how dynamic the events have progressed since then. This very obvious rigged election, the violation of human rights, all of this has brought about a completely new situation. And through this development, we believe that Mr. Lukashenko has lost any democratic legality that he could have claimed. So what will this mean to our future cooperation? Now, from our perspective, this is not a geopolitical conflict. We don't see any European flags in the demonstrations in Minsk or in Belarus. We can see that what they want is no repression, non-violence, free election, participation, and so on and so forth. So this means this conflict is an inner national conflict, and it must be resolved through dialogue within of Belarus. It is not anti-Russian or pro-European, and Minsk 2020 is not like Minsk 2013. Therefore, from the very beginning, as a federal government, we have said we must not meddle in this from the outside, and we stick to this. Russia is also saying this is an internal affair of Belarus and it should not be meddled with. But unfortunately, we have to realize that this is only something, an opinion they voice, because Russian state journalists have come to interfere with striking workers in Minsk and so on and so forth. So there has been meddling. So what do we have to do? Looking at this situation, at this moment, we are looking at the whole portfolio of our cooperation with the Belarusian offices, state offices and institutions. Some of them had already been stalled. The European Union is doing the same. They are looking at all the projects of cooperation and also, let's say, if the European Investment Bank or other banks, when they extend loans to Belarus, they are now looking afresh at these loans, because the goal of our cooperation has to be that this cooperation will benefit the people and not government offices. So, on the other hand, especially from Germany and from Poland, pushed by this within the EU, we have seen already 2 rounds of sanctions that have been imposed of those responsible for repression within Belarus. And these sanctions we have established in the face of those people that are responsible for violating human rights and rigging the election. Unfortunately, these sanctions have up to now not yet been effective. So now we are considering a third package of sanctions. And as I have said, we recalibrate our cooperation so that it benefits people who have, of course, full rights to partake in democratic decisions, like students, like journalists, people who strike, very normal citizens or journalists who participate, normal citizens who take to the streets very bravely and courageously and are demanding free and fresh elections in the face of growing repression. So let me just give you a few examples what else we are doing.
Also in the social media, for example, for those journalists who lost their jobs, we are doubling the share of those people who get paid during their studies in Belarus. We also issue support for scientists, and we simplify the granting of visa for those who see the necessity to leave the country, at least temporarily, and to come to Germany. In comparison with the authorities, the government, we have made it clear all the time that it's about serious dialogue. It's about the release of the political prisoners who are over 100 now. It's about a fast end of violence and repression against the own population. We also submit the mediation offers which have been tabled, helping a true national dialogue which cannot be conducted in a KGB prison. And also, we are ready, and that complementary to what State Secretary Przydacz said at the beginning, to work much more intensely in our cooperation with this country once the above-mentioned conditions have been met. Thereby, we also support the initiative of our Polish friends in favor of an economic program supporting the economy of a democratic Belarus. Unfortunately, we have not yet reached that point. Seen from today, and this is my conclusion, it's not yet too late for the government to get in a dialogue with its people. I read 2 hours ago that even President Putin said in Moscow that a political dialogue has to be conducted with all political forces in the population in Belarus. So a step back before the time of the 9th of August will not be possible as I see it, because the Belarus society has seen a fundamental change, and this is what we should base our cooperation on. Thank you.
Mr. Sibbe, especially for your words about Mr. Putin. I think it's a good signal to go to Moscow, to Nadia Arbatova, and please explain us how you and how your colleagues in Moscow are watching to Minsk and to the current situation. Nadia, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Cornelius. It will be a Russian view, not the Russian view. And let me start with one general remark. Geographically, Belarus is sandwiched between Russia and European Union, but politically, it is strongly tied to Russia. Belarus is a member of the State Union, no matter how artificial it is Russia's security ally, it is a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, let alone CIS. So the ties are really strong. And Russia has long relied on Belarus as a friendly partner with no ambition to join NATO. As for European Union, Belarus is a close neighbor. It is part of the Eastern Partnership, and this fact caused a negative reaction in Russia, and it promoted very controversial feelings within the Belarusian opposition. Lukashenko has never enjoyed Kremlin's special life. And until recent events, he tried to sit on 2 chairs. He tried to provoke Kremlin on many occasions. He did not recognize the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. He did not recognize Crimea as an integral part of the Russian Federation. So he has been viewed as a kind of maverick in the CIS. And Kremlin actually does not care very much about Lukashenko's personal survival. If Kremlin is sure that he will be replaced with a person less toxic to Belarusians and more predictable to Moscow. The protest movements that came as a big surprise for everybody confronted Russia with a very difficult dilemma, how to respond to this crisis. On the one hand, Lukashenko is Russia's security ally, and Russia cannot stand aloof. It is all the more so since Russia is concerned about, or I would say is obsessed with the threat of orange revolutions. And the real disaster for Kremlin would be a new Belarusian leader with anti-Russian bias and clear pro-Western leanings. On the other hand, Moscow understands that the stakes in Belarus are really high. If Russia intervenes militarily, it will get more trouble than success. First, it will lose Belarusians who have never been anti-Russian. Second, if a state union is revived in a new format of a new federation, Russia will get a rebellious territory within this new federation. Russia will be faced with very tough international relations, no doubt about that. And the last but not least, Russia's military intervention could trigger a chain of unfavorable events for everybody, for Russia, for European Union, for Belarus, for the world, because there remains the risks that the situation could eventually turn violent and see Russia and the West on opposite sides of a conflict. So the biggest concern in Moscow is internationalization of this internal conflict. President Putin, as you know, has publicly pledged assistance for Lukashenko, and they met in person in Sochi. Mr. Shoigu went to Minsk to meet his colleagues, and the joint military drills took place in Brest. But for now, I think that Kremlin prefers a wait-and-see attitude. Only violence could force Russia to intervene. For the European Union, there are limits as to what it can realistically do to influence the situation besides sanctions. And there is a common understanding in European Union. There is a common reading of the origins of this crisis. There is a common attitude towards Mr. Lukashenko as illegitimate president. But as for concrete reaction of different member states, we can see very pronounced differences. The bordering states, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, are very much in favor of more decisive reaction of Brussels, while Brussels is trapped not only Brussels, but the main driving force, the Franco-German tandem, they are trapped in a very difficult dilemma how to find the right balance between respect of rule of law, human rights, and real politics. It's a very difficult dilemma. European Union, unlike the situation in Ukraine, fully recognizes special ties that exist between Russia and Belarus, and on many occasions it shows the will not to sever these ties. As for Mr. Lukashenko, and excuse me, the preferred scenario for European Union and for the leading EU member states, paradoxically, as well as for Moscow, would be Lukashenko's peaceful departure from power. Peaceful departure, all political prisoners are released, new presidential elections will take place. So I think that in this respect, Moscow and European Union are more or less on the same side. The problem is different. And the problem is with Mr. Lukashenko. We know that he already declared that constitutional reform is the necessary precondition from his resignation. But it's not clear whether this constitutional reform is just an attempt to delay time, and he's preparing a real unpleasant surprise in line with the famous principle, let's not make their life easier. So my major concern is Mr. Lukashenko, because the fragile balance can be easily destroyed only with one step, only one wrong step, only new violent actions, and the situation will explode. I'm very close to the end, but I would like to say a few words about their position. I cannot but admire Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. She became a symbol of this protest movement. However, I think that the position needs a leader on the ground. Without such a leader, it will be very difficult to peacefully end this story. And my last words, I think that there is one guiding principle for both Russia and the EU, the neighbors of Belarus. Do no harm, do no harm. Try to avoid any escalation of this domestic conflict. But saying this, I understand that it's very difficult to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for your presentation. On my screen, I see a few interesting questions, but before we start the discussion, the last but not least is Anna Maria Dinner from Warsaw, from the Institute for International Relations. Anna, the floor is yours.
Спасибо большое. Я перейду на русский, просто чтобы чуть-чуть добавить русского языка до нашей...
Thank you so much. I will switch to Russian just to add some more Russian to today's discussion. So thank you to everyone for your wonderful presentations. So thank you, Mr. Przydacz, for your words as well, because it makes it a lot easier for me in terms of showing how Poland sees the situation and what is to be done next. But I will add something more. So I would want to underline that Poland has always been and will always be interested in supporting the independent and sovereign Belarus. I agree with Mr. Przydacz and Mr. Szadurski that if the neighbors feel good, then everybody benefits. That's one thing. But then another thing is that we see the situation from Polish perspective, where it would be very good if Belarusian authorities could respond to the aspirations of their own people to let them build their own state. So, also when looking at our Polish history in the 80s, in the 90s, the transformations that took place, I can say that violence never leads to any good. That is why Poland would always be interested in Belarusian developing either negotiations or the dialogue. Actually, that's a very interesting point that was raised, the point of difference between dialogue and negotiations. So there has to be a dialogue between the opposition, the authorities, and the civil society. Otherwise, the crisis will only continue to aggravate, and it will be no good for anybody, not for Belarus, not for neighboring countries. What comes next is I do agree that what happens in Belarus is the internal crisis. So far, it hasn't been a geopolitical crisis. There was no talk about the changes in foreign policy vector, but this crisis still impacts the security in the region. It has to be paid attention to at two levels. First, is that previously everybody, including Belarusian authorities, wanted Belarus to be considered a safe place in the region. Now, the situation is different. On the part of the Ukraine and other neighboring countries, there is almost no trust to security and safety in Belarus. That's the first problem I see. And then the second is the more profound military integration between Belarus and Russia, all the military drills that took place. So what we can offer to do next? Of course, a lot has been said before that Poland will always be supportive of the civil society, that Poland will always be supportive of the people who have to flee to our country because they don't feel safe and there is a threat to their safety. There are patriots in Belarus, and we acknowledge that, and there are a lot of people to support. However, there are also organizations that we need to pay attention to. Mr. Przydacz already paid attention to that. So that is the OSCE. And what we can do is we can just suggest, let's say, to offer good offices. And one more is the dialogue regarding the military thing. So we could support the military alliances that we had previously, that would help us with the arms control. And that would let us avoid the military incidents that were happening during the last months. So in the Eastern Partnership and the European Union, we have here the opportunity to support the country. So this is something that we call the Marshall Plan for Belarus, though not all of it, of course. And again, there is also the situation between Poland and Belarus, where, of course, on the one hand, we're at the lowest level, but the most important, that is the local authority level. And of course, we will be supporting all the transformations in Belarus that would be necessary for the Belarusian nation. So thank you very much for your attention.
Let's come to the discussion with the audience. So first of all, we have an interesting comment from the Bundestag, from the Committee for International Relations, that there is a really interesting discussion, including positions from the neighborhood countries. Thank you very much. And I have a following, I have two questions, and maybe I can provide it to you, Mr. Przydacz. The first question is, what happens if the European Union realizes that Lukashenko is bluffing and no constitutional reforms is going? And maybe the second question regarding the European Union to Mr. Siebert: how dramatical should the situation become for the EU to make the decision that dialogue is neither possible nor acceptable for Lukashenko? So could we start with these two questions? Mr. Przydacz, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, thank you for this question. Yes, as we've heard after the Lavrov, it was mentioned the meeting of Mr. Lukashenko and Mr. Putin, the visit of Mr. Shoigu, but it wasn't mentioned that Mr. Lavrov was also in Minsk recently, and just after this visit, Mr. Lukashenko announced that he is ready to think about the constitutional changes. Our perception and what we do think is that any kind of changes in the Belarusian system and constitutional changes should be just a second step. The first step is the dialogue between the authorities and the people, and the free elections, of course. I mean, just let's give the opportunity to the people to decide about the future of the country, and then they could decide about the future political system of their own country. That's our perspective. So any kind of that's change, that there will be some cosmetic change in the constitution, with a promise from Mr. Lukashenko that he will resign, is not the right direction. It's not the right answer to this political crisis, I would say. So the question was about bluffing. Of course, I mean, Alexander Lukashenko is not in politics since yesterday. We know him very well, and we know that he has been bluffing many times, not only us as the EU, but also his closer partner in Kremlin. And I'm pretty sure that they don't believe Mr. Lukashenko either. That's why they've been checking whether the agreement from Sochi is being realized somehow in the process. So of course, the mistrust or distrust is on a huge scale, I would say, yeah, we'll see. I mean, the pressure for sure will be continued from the EU. If there would be no positive steps from in Minsk, for sure there will be, as we've heard, not only from the Polish or the neighboring countries, but even the distant countries are somehow convinced that there should be only that direction. From one side, the pressure on the authorities to stop repression and to start the dialogue, and on the other, the kind of positive perception. So if it's accused that it's a bluff, probably we'll just continue the same approach. It will be much harder to establish or to re-establish a kind of trust between the Belarusian authorities and the European authorities. So we still believe that they will understand in Minsk that only by inviting the people to this process, they could somehow avoid negative scenario, because it is still, I mean, the political crisis is deepening and the economic crisis is deepening. So, and there are far less moves which are ahead of Mr. Lukashenko. I'm pretty sure that he will be somehow mature enough to realize that's the only positive outcome of this is to first to start the dialogue, then to think about the new election, and then to change the political system if that is needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Przydacz. And Mr. Siebert, would you like to add something to this statement?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Ochmann, you have asked
for Mr. Lukashenko to accept the necessity of a dialogue with his people, if I can still say his people. That's a difficult question, but we can see that he's under triple pressure, if I may say so, because he, of course, has a huge pressure from his own people demonstrating in the streets. There is a growing pressure from the European Union on the Western like-minded countries. And for instance, we feel that the debate about inclusion of economic actors in Belarus into the next list of people or entities sanctioned creates some uproar in Minsk. And there is, of course, also pressure from Russia, as I just quoted Putin, as he's quoted by Reuters, asking for a political dialogue with all political forces and resolve all its internal questions themselves without any kind of external pressure and outside interference. That's what Mr. Lukashenko is not yet willing to bring about. So we don't know, but maybe the question can be asked in a slightly different way. Does the dialogue necessarily have to come from Mr. Lukashenko? Or would not the better option be for him to step aside? And as many opposition figures tell me, other actors from the current leadership could play the role of the other side in a national dialogue. People who are more accepted by the population. So we can only guess on this.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that our time is over, but I hope we get 2 or 3 minutes more from Berlin, because I see 2 interesting questions from the public, and maybe I can provide the first question to Nadia Arbatova. And we have a question: what happens if the the question is, how likely is a Russian military intervention if Belarusian society pursues its way to democracy? And the last question, and I hope Mrs. Šešelgytė or Mr. Szadurski can answer the question: what about the atomic power station in Belarus? So, Nadia, maybe we start with you.
Thank you. I think that Russia will intervene militarily only if there is violence. And as I have already mentioned, unfortunately, violence can be provoked by anybody, including Mr. Lukashenko. As for democracy in Belarus, I think that democracy cannot appear overnight. And in any case, Belarus, under the best possible scenario, if Lukashenko steps down, if political situation in Belarus is getting better, only even in this under this scenario, democracy won't come tomorrow. Belarus needs kind of transition period, and this transition is very important. I think that there will be a transit, president, more moderate, less toxic to his own people, and acceptable for Moscow. I fully agree with Mr. Shatursky that Russia is a key actor in this domestic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Šešelgytė, are you ready to answer the question about the atomic power station?
Yeah, I think I could take it because it's one of the issues that overshadowing Belarus-Lithuanian relations for a number of years already. And what we see from our side was it is a security problem, first of all, because we don't believe that this nuclear power plant is entirely secure. And a number of accidents, including one several weeks before, just raises our awareness that the nuclear power plant is not secure. For Belarus is a security problem as well, because insecurity within the plant also affects the Belarusians, but it is also an economic energy problem because it increases Belarusian dependency on Russia, which is already vast in energy sector. So I think that this is a problem. And whoever comes after Lukashenko, I think that there should be a new dialogue between the European Union, first of all, and Belarus regarding the future of this nuclear power plant. First of all, about the security standards, but also Belarus will have to think how important this nuclear power plant for them is in the future due to security, but also to this increased dependency on Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shatursky, the last sentence from your side.
Спасибо. Самая большая проблема.
Thank you. The biggest problem in our dialogue with Lithuania is actually in the fact that the NPP has already been constructed and our neighbors are having some concerns. So we need to hold some dialogue regarding the operation of this NPP, as well as the ways the energy will be sold. So we need to discuss this in more detail. The nuclear dialogue with Lithuania was not an easy one. Anyway, we will keep discussing this issue with account of the interests of all stakeholders.
The last sentence from your side.
What should I say more? I just, I really want that there will be a time that we will be able to reestablish the real dialogue with Belarusian authorities, those Belarusian authorities, which will be accepted by their own people. So maybe I will stop here and sum up our discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for this interesting discussion. I can see on my screen Christian Tripper from Berlin. Thanks a lot, and let's stay in contact. I hope the next year we will see each other in Minsk. Christian, over to you.
Cornelius, vielen Dank auch von meiner Seite nochmal für das spannende
Cornelius, many thanks. Also from me, many thanks for this very exciting panel. And with that, we have covered the first day of the Minsk Forum. We will be back tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then we will begin with the topic of economy, sustainable economic relationships and economy in Belarus, Europe. Have a nice evening and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.